Now we're going to take a look at the 26th President of the United States, William Taft. Again, the 5 criteria we always look at are growth, finances, international politics, war and security, and the most important one, to leave the country better or worse than they found it. Taft came in, I think it's fair to say, as a result of a lot of Roosevelt's influence and Roosevelt's popularity. Roosevelt, as I discussed last time, had really changed the direction of the country. He came in after McKinley's assassination, used the moment to really change the direction of the country in a lot of ways, not in all ways. Roosevelt certainly wasn't a perfect president. I put him at third, but I think you also have to understand third in relation to Washington and Lincoln are way above everybody else, and then everyone below that has some sort of flaw. So Roosevelt came in and changed the direction of the country that it had suddenly drifted and lurched toward imperialist goals with conquest of, with the Spanish-American War, had occupied the Philippines, had occupied a number of Spanish territories, and Roosevelt hadn't continued that trend, and it also changed a lot of philosophical things in the United States with regards to progressivism and coming up with less focus on making sure the wealthy were doing well, and also discussions about taking care of the poor in some ways, the square deal. This was a major change in direction. And so Roosevelt leaving, one of the slogans for Taft was, Roosevelt cut a lot of hay, it's time for Taft to put it in the barn. And the idea was Taft would be a good administrator. Taft was a very intelligent man, he was a very respected man. Some argue that he didn't even want to be president. He preferred to be Chief Justice because he was really interested in the law. And so when Taft came in, there was a lot of optimism that he would continue Roosevelt's ways, and honestly, maybe even do it better, because Roosevelt was kind of a bombastic, bigger-than-life figure. And having someone who understood the law, understood the technicalities, could maybe get things done more effectively. And the thing that they first thought he was going to do, and the thing that he kind of ran on, was, I'm going to reduce tariffs and replace those tariffs with income taxes that would be more fair. So we'll get rid of these tariffs, which affect everybody, and seem to more affect the poor, farmers, people at the lower end, whereas the rich weren't as affected by tariffs, was the understanding, and implement an income tax that could be targeted, a progressive tax that could be targeted to focus more on the rich, so that the rich would pay their quote-unquote fair share. And so he ran on this, and this was the expectation. But then when they passed the laws, they were able to pass the 16th Amendment to modify the income tax, or to allow them to modify the income tax, and they were sent out. That was sent out to the states. Some argue it was sent out to the states because it was expected to never pass in the state legislatures, but that's a separate issue. It did pass. But when he passed the Payne-Aldrich Tariff Act, again, it wasn't that he advocated for this act. He certainly wanted the act to lower tariffs more. He just wasn't a very effective politician. And that's one of the reasons why I give Roosevelt credit, is he was an effective politician. He was able to use the bully pulpit to pressure Congress to do things that they didn't want to do, to pressure business to do things they didn't want to do. His popularity was able to be leveraged, and his relationship with the press was able to be leveraged. Taft didn't have any of that. Taft did not have a very good relationship with the press. Taft didn't have a strong ability to influence people to change things. And so this Payne-Aldrich tariff comes out, and although maybe technically, and I think if you look at it and really parse it, it did technically lower some tariffs, it also raised other tariffs and was seen across the country as an increase in tariffs, and destroyed the unity of the GOP. The Republican Party fractured deeply over this. He then followed it up where he was doing things that he was doing antitrust. And again, he was probably doing more antitrust than Roosevelt. But when he was doing it, through the discussion of it, his people were criticizing Roosevelt and saying that Roosevelt at times got duped by U.S. Steel, which again angered Roosevelt, not understanding that Roosevelt's popularity was even more important than the policy. The man was very charismatic, and he was able to convince people to do things, or at least just push it through. And Taft didn't have that. And now he had an enemy in Roosevelt. So you go from having a GOP that comes in, a Republican Party that comes in, able to basically argue that they were a moderate approach to progressivism, because you still also at this time you have Eugene Debs running on a socialist agenda. The left is starting to realize that there's a populist path, and they're shifting in that direction, and they're arguing for these reforms. They've their party has shifted as they've tried to find ways to become relevant again on a national scale. And he just doesn't accomplish the thing he was supposed to accomplish. The tariff thing that was supposed to lower tariffs and make everybody's taxes less, and then shift the burdens to the rich, doesn't happen. He does pass a corporate income tax, but it's only for 1%. So it really has no major effect. I'm saying this undergrowth and finances because I think the two are combined. Like, I mean, undergrowth, you could say we added Arizona and New Mexico, but I don't really think that really grew the country. But in terms of finances, these things didn't do what he promised. I think the finances of the country were good under his administration. I don't think that there was a problem with finances under his administration because he did slightly lower tariffs and he did pass the income tax uh, amendment, and the amendment did get through, and he did create corporate income taxes, and those things would later be used to shift away from tariffs and to shift more toward an income tax that was able to get the income from the rich who were consolidating wealth and power. An income tax is, in a way, kind of an antitrust move in and of itself. In other words, too much wealth consolidated is too much power. When you can literally buy, the newspapers and the radios of the time and buy the stations and control the media, it's very difficult to overcome that unless you have a personality like Teddy Roosevelt did, which is again why I gave him so much credit, even if he was flawed in many ways. So, in terms of growth, I would say he did not do particularly well. The country didn't grow that much because he was not able to accomplish the things he wanted to accomplish and navigate it because he's not a particularly good politician, but the finances are pretty good. In terms of international politics, he shifted the Roosevelt approach, the old speak softly and carry a big stick, to something that was a little bit more patronizing. It's been referred to as dollar diplomacy. Not to say that Roosevelt himself wasn't patronizing, not to say that speak softly to carry a big stick wasn't a patronizing approach, but it's even more patronizing when you're basically telling businesses to go in and manipulate the markets in places, and then you're going to come in and support them in the U.S. and just kind of like we already had the banana wars, but it got to the point with the dollar diplomacy where business owners were going in and trying to buy businesses and expecting the U.S. military to come in and support them. And if they didn't, then they would make deals. It became very, very corrupt very, very quick. Again, not that before it wasn't bad, not before that Roosevelt's big speak softly and carry a big stick wasn't corrupt. I mean the Panama paying the Panamanian rebels and Colombia thing was very, very sketchy on many levels, but that was also a clear goal and a conflict. It wasn't a way of doing colonialism by economic means. There was still an understanding that the countries were separate and that we were having a kind of a conflict over a specific issue, but we weren't trying to buy the country. We weren't trying to use our financial leverage to force the country into debt or to openly and brazenly try to take over the markets of the country. And so that was what dollar diplomacy kind of morphed into, even if that wasn't Taft's intention. And it just failed on every level. It did not succeed in terms of economics, and it also didn't succeed in terms of building relationships with people willing to work with us. It destroyed a lot of trust. It was very ineffective foreign policy. We also had Mexico at this point collapse. The Mexican government collapsed. And Taft really didn't do anything other than send 20,000 troops to the border to make sure it didn't continue to have the overflow that was starting. There were a number of cross-border skirmishes. People died. And his response was to send 20,000 troops to the border, but to not in any way intervene in the conflict itself. You can argue that was probably the right approach, but I think it's also reflective of Taft's policy generally, which is he was letting other people do the dirty work and just kind of standing on the sidelines. Like dollar diplomacy was not a directed diplomat. I have a specific goal. It's more like, oh, businesses, you want to try something? Sure, you guys go negotiate something, and then I'll back you up as the U.S. I don't know I don't know if you're actually going to be the good guy, the bad guy. I don't know what you're negotiating. It was very messy. Again, outsourcing the actual decision making in a way that Roosevelt didn't. Roosevelt made the decisions, right, wrong, or indifferent. It was clear who was making the decisions, and if things needed to be discussed, they they were discussed. I think he was the one who said the buck stops here, and he was pretty fair about that. Again, not defending many of his decisions. I keep circling back to that because I think it's an important distinction. But more with Roosevelt's leadership, it was clear what he was doing, where he was doing it. You could get clear direction and answers. There would be finality on decisions. Taft was very fuzzy on a lot of things in international politics, and because of that, you couldn't really build trust with him. You could not have assurances that anything would happen one way or the other, similar to how the tariff went down, because he was not the one making the decisions. He was deferring, he was allowing others, and then kind of coming in and trying to clean up the mess afterwards. That also was kind of how I reflect on him with the war and security. Again, Mexico collapses. We have to send 20,000 troops to the border, but we don't intervene. But there's still some cross-border conflicts. We're having not a lot of resolution with regards to the issues in the Philippines. It's indecisiveness, it's deference, it's kind of a symptom of his entire presidency. In terms of better or worse, this was a difficult question for me, and I think it's because I'm looking at what came before and after. I don't think that the country is significantly worse because of Taft, but I definitely don't think it's significantly better. His party was completely decimated. Taft finished third in his own reelection, only getting 23.2% of the vote, finishing behind Roosevelt, who ran and who created the Progressive Party and ran completely independently of Taft because the party had been split so much. And this led to Wilson winning with only 41% of the vote. He was not successful at many of the things he wanted to accomplish. And I honestly think I'm going to give him a slightly worse grade because I think a lot of things were lined up for him to do. I think it was lined up for him to be able to get tariffs lowered and the income tax passed. I think it was lined up for him to do things like have more free trade agreements and to be able to continue the diplomacy that Roosevelt had set up, where America might be a country you're afraid of, but they're an honest broker if you make a deal. If you don't make a deal, then America's going to do things, again, not defending it, but it's gonna use the big stick. But it would love to negotiate, and once the negotiation is done, it's not necessarily to your detriment. We're not necessarily doing things specifically to harm you. We have interests. We're going in to get our interests, and we would like to negotiate a deal. And if you won't negotiate a deal, we're going to have a problem. Again, the biggest negative example of this was Colombia, but other than the Colombia and Panama thing, and the Colombia-Panama thing was basically we wanted the Isthmus of Panama, and we were going to build a canal there, and that was going to happen, and that wasn't a negotiation point. But I do think, generally speaking, relative to the rest of the European world, the colonial powers, and relative to McKinley before him, Roosevelt was trying to have more direct engagement and I don't want to say equal, but I do want to say fair dealings with other countries as other countries. And I think Taft was more interested in staying on the sidelines and then coming in to try to figure out how to solve a problem rather than having a clear goal and really taking a leadership position. So because of all that, where am I going to put Taft? In some ways, he reminds me of John Adams, in the terms that he kind of broke his party apart, but I don't think he did as good a job as John Adams, even though I was critical of John Adams. In looking at the list, I think I'm going to put him at 15, just ahead of Benjamin Harrison and below Zachary Taylor. That's a weird spot, but I found that to be the spot that I'm kind of thinking of as neutral. Benjamin Harrison only served for a month, so I can't say he was good or bad, but he had a slight knock against him because I don't like Millard Fillmore's presidency. And Zachary Taylor only served for 16 months, but I think he did a good job in those 16 months. So putting Taft between him kind of puts Taft at a very neutral presidency. I think you could have someone else come in and do a better job, and I think you could have someone come in and do a worse job, but I'm not really impressed with his presidency in any way, shape, or form.